Welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. Joining me from the good state of Michigan, is that right?
That is correct.
Is Kelly James Clark. And we're going to be speaking with Kelly about his new book, which is called Raging Fire. And we'll put a link to that. And he's going to hold up the book right there. Raging Fire, what I've learned from Jesus, the Jews, and the prophet. And this is an interesting book, and this is for those of you interested in spirituality and your growth in spirituality and expanding your consciousness. Our conversation is going to give you an opportunity to do that. If you want to learn more about Kelly James Clark, you can go to kellymjamesclark.wixsite, wixsite.com. That's where you can learn more about him. And this is not his only book. He has many books. How many books do you have to your publishing background?
Including books that I've edited, probably more than 30.
30. So he is not new to writing, and this book is definitely an opportunity for people to take a deep dive. And so I want to let them know a little bit about you. Kelly James Clark is Ph.D., University of Notre Dame. He's Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Ibn Haldun.
Ibn Haldun.
Ibn Haldun. See, I got it wrong anyway, even though you told me. University of Istanbul. Kelly has held previous positions at Grand Valley State University, Calvin University, and Gordon College, and visiting appointments at Oxford University, the University of St. Andrews, Peking University, and the University of Notre Dame. He's an author, editor, and co-author of more than 30 books, including this one we're going to be talking about, Raging Fire of Love, What I've Learned from Jesus, the Jews, and the Prophets. He's got other books called Strangers, Neighbors, Friends, A Muslim, Christian, Jewish Reflections on Compassion and Peace. So look him up on the web. He also won third place in the Christianity Today's Book of the Year. But he said, which might not sound like much, but the Pope's book was 8th. So he writes broadly and he speaks widely on compassion, tolerance, and peace. And that's what we're going to be speaking with today. I can't remember. Did your forward on this one, was the forward, it was the Dalai Lama or no?
It's the Dalai Lama, yes.
Yeah. Well, when you get the Dalai Lama to write the forward, darn, that's a good deal. That's a good day. Let me tell you.
I was not unhappy.
No, you shouldn't have been unhappy. So, this book delves into a lot of things, and I've come up with some questions so my listening audience can get an idea of not only the book, but you as a person, and also what they would want to take away at the end of this interview. So I'm really, because you've written so many other books, Kelly, what inspired you to write Raging Fire, and what do you hope and how it will impact the conversations around love in all of these various traditions, but Abrahamic traditions and traditional.
Yeah. I after 9/11, I had written academically about liberty and tolerance. And by that, I mean, I wrote articles that basically nobody read. And then after 9/11, I thought these things that I was exploring academically and abstractly about liberty and tolerance were issues that were desperately needed in the public around the world. And I knew after 9/11, although I don't think I had a Muslim friend, I knew after 9/11 that Christians would be very likely to blame all Muslims for the attack on 9/11, and that Islam would be looked at as a religion of violence, and that Arabs would be viewed as kind of subhuman, violent camel jockeys. And I thought, that I had been working on tools that people could employ to resist the intolerance that I saw coming. And so I began to put together a book called Abraham's Children, and it included essays by 5 Muslims, 5 Christians, 5 Jews, and they were prominent Muslims, Christians, and Jews. One was the former President Jimmy Carter, and he wrote a really nice piece, mostly about his reflections on peace in Palestine. And I will say, as he approaches the end, I had a grant, and I offered each one of the writers $5,000. And in the end, when I had the money and went to distribute it, Jimmy Carter just said, give it to a charity that works on these issues. Everyone else was an academic. They were only too eager to get their $5,000.
Well, that's Jimmy Carter. I'm surprised he didn't give it to Habitat for Humanity, which is probably where he would have liked to have seen it gone.
Yeah, he was extremely kind to work with.
Oh, I'm sure of that. I'm sure.
Yeah. And I got the former president of Indonesia, which is the most populous Muslim country in the world. And I'll say this, and hopefully this will strike a chord with your readers. I had no idea that Indonesia was the largest, most populous Muslim country in the world. I knew almost nothing about Islam. I'm embarrassed to say now. And I think a lot of us don't know much, in the West, don't know much about Islam, and we don't know many Muslims. And that, I think, is to our detriment. At any rate, I published the book. We did a conference in Washington, D.C. We also did a joint evening in a church in Alexandria, Virginia, which is, I think, the most diverse community in the United States. And that church wanted to do an event that involved Muslims and Jews. And I said, well, I'll do it if you serve them dinner. Not just that you have dinner served, but you serve them dinner. Then we'll come and we'll do something. And because I think a lot of good things happen when our people are in a position of being a servant and are passing food back and forth to one another. Anyway, they did that. 2 different imams from mosques in town came and brought members of their mosque. One of the synagogues came, and they decided at the end of that evening after the program that they would work together on poverty reduction, that there were values that they shared, that they didn't have to agree on what they thought about God or the afterlife, but that's okay. They agreed a lot about what should happen in this life, and that his people should not starve to death. And so that... Well,
and people, as you've said, should be compassionate with one another. I mean, they, what do you think is fueling? You talk, this book's called Raging Fire.
Yeah.
And you're talking about Muslims, but the anti-Semitism around the Judaism and the Jews is just at an all-time high in almost every city.
Yeah.
What do you think's proliferating that particular kind of anger against? I get that we've got Israel, we've got Netanyahu, we've got all of these other extenuating circumstances, but not a reason to go out and bonk people over the head that are trying to worship at their church or their synagogue, I should say, at their synagogue, right?
Yeah. I mean, most synagogues in big cities in the United States have to have round-the-clock security.
Right.
Anti-Semitism is so bad. And it's not good. And so my very first chapter is called Fear and the Failures of Love. And I work in cognitive psychology of religion. I work with cognitive psychologists and social scientists and neuroscientists. And I think the most powerful motivator for most human beings most of the time is fear. I think we want to say, love makes the world go around, and it may make the world go around, but it's got to correct for all the fear there is in the world. And fear is a super powerful motivator, and not just politician, I won't say every politician, many politicians prey on our fears and make them worse. The media preys on our fears. We like bad news. We don't like good news.
But this old statement, right? Like, I've done personal growth interviews here. The show is called Inside Personal Growth.
Yeah.
And it's always been said, and you can put this any way you want, psychologically, philosophically, theologically, but fear has always been said the false expectation appearing real. And, it's like, yes, okay, I put it in my head, and from a psychological standpoint, I believe that those Jews could be a threat. I believe those Muslims could be a threat.
Yeah.
What I don't get, and here's where you deeply explore this theme of love across different religious traditions, what are some of the most surprising commonalities you found between Jews, Jesus, Jewish teachings, and Islamic principles? I think this is where the pedal hits the metal. It's kind of like, if you picked up the Quran, if you picked up the Bible, if you picked up all of these various tools, and you're one person I can ask, you're going to find common themes amongst all of them.
Yeah, I didn't know about love in each of these traditions. I knew Christianity quite well. It's my own tradition. And I knew Judaism well enough, at least through the Hebrew Bible. But I didn't know much about Islam. And I was asked to write a white paper for the Fetzer Institute on love in the Abrahamic traditions. And honestly, I came with my own biases. I thought what I would find is that Jews were just tribal and parochial, and that love only extended to their Jewish neighbors, and that Christianity is universal love, and God is love, and all is good. And then in Islam, you would just find an emphasis on justice, and with trying to do good things to get into the afterlife. That's what I thought I would find. Instead, what I found was that all three religions demand compassion, and they demand it at all sorts of levels, and they demand it for the most, I guess, outsider in society, the most oppressed. They all demand it for the poor, the widow, and the orphan. I was shocked to find out that Islam says that that aimed at releasing slaves. They thought compassion required you to release slaves. You can't treat them like human beings if you enslave them. And so I found compassion at every level, not only for yourself and your family and for your kin, but also for your tribe and your community, and for strangers, which Islam calls them near neighbors, but people near you, but who are different from you and believe different from you. And Islam grew up in a culture that had both Jews and Christians, and the Prophet said, we all need to live together. We're all followers of God. We need to live together. But also, and this is the thing that shocked me, they all say that we are required to show love in various ways for our enemy. And we're not supposed to fight them. We're supposed to love them. And each of the traditions is unequivocal about loving stranger, neighbor, and even enemy.
I think, this is off the wall question, but your father passed away kind of recently, right? I have that correct?
No, my father passed away. Actually, my brother has been in the hospital and nearly died, but my father died young.
Okay.
6 when he passed away.
Okay. I maybe have gotten that wrong. But, when we look at finitude, all religions are trying to allow us to come to grips with what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
Because we all look at this as the whole, you could say, well, are you afraid of death? Or are you not afraid of death? Talk about the fears, and obviously these radical groups, and in particularly kind of Muslims, you were talking about the attack at the 9/11. If you talked about justice as well, I heard that mentioned. It's kind of like an eye for an eye at that point, and they didn't care if they died, and they were going to go up. I think everybody that's out there is like, well, how many virgins are you going to get afterwards? You'll hear people joke about that, right? It's like it happens everywhere. What is the misperception that the public has about this Muslims and this belief that they would go do something so heinous? And we're talking about radical ones, not most of them, because we've got to divide this here. This is not all the people that are part of the Muslim religion. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I work in religion and violence as well, though I don't talk about it in this book. And let me just take the leader of 9/11, I think it was Muhammad Atta, I think is his name. And he wrote this tribute to Allah before he went and killed himself. So he wrote this beautiful tribute, and everyone said, oh, he attacked because he was a Muslim. But while he was training for in the flight school in Florida, every night he'd go out to a bar and get drunk. He snorted cocaine. His girlfriend was a stripper. He lived with her when she broke up with him. He snuck into her house, and she had a couple of kittens, and he tore the kittens into little pieces and distributed his body parts all over the house. And I just can't find myself thinking that he was really a very good Muslim. But what he did was he wrote a document that tried to show he was, and he was just trying to,
cover up.
He was trying to show to people that he was better than he was.
Right.
Reputation management. And of course, he didn't think people would know the secrets of his life. And I think that they attacked mostly because they felt powerless, and they felt an injustice had been done to them.
Retribution, kind of, to a degree.
And it was retribution. And it wasn't over religion primarily. It was primarily over all sorts of things that happen in the Middle East that make people really angry. The number one motivator for mostly young men, if they're going to be radicalized, is a sense of isolation, a sense of powerlessness, and a sense of injustice that they're going to right.
Yeah. And, when you look at whether it's Ukraine and at this point, Russia and the war, and you look at the number of young men that are recruited by Russia to fight in that war, you only have to follow the money, because they've been repressed so long that somebody can pay them some money to go fight in a war that they were impoverished before, and now they're getting paid to do something. Yet, oh, well, who's going to take into account that I'm going to lose my life in the process of this? It's really just almost totally diabolical when you look at the scheme of, how that war is going, and there's no reason for it at all. But back to your book, you discuss this destructive power of fear in relation to love. Yeah. Can you elaborate on how overcoming fear, this is a key one, can lead to a deeper interpersonal and interfaith relationship? Because you've mentioned fear now 5 or 6 times. And my sense is that however people are perceiving fear, it's normally a perception that's distorted. Yeah. Normally.
Yeah, I think that's right. Fear creates enemies when they're not there.
Right.
People can exploit our fears. I think most of our so-called enemies aren't really our enemies. I came to learn that 99.999% of Muslims don't want to kill us, and aren't terrorists, and are a lot like you and me. So, coming to learn that, I'm semi-embarrassed to even say it now, but I have found in all of my travels around the world with Muslims, Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Hindus, Taoists, Confucianists, pretty much everybody is the same as everybody else. They want to live in peace. They want a better life for their children. They want their children to get educated. They want to sleep at night. They don't have to worry about bombs being on their head or them dropping bombs on someone else's head. That's the way most people are like. And so then we generate these fears of these people who are just like us. They're not killers. Some of their leaders can move them to kill by preying on their fears, and our leaders can respond in fear to them. And it's a really deadly historical cycle. There's just no doubt about it.
Well, it's I think it's this. I was doing an interview with a gentleman, and his book is called Open. And I remember him saying, look, we become so divisive as a result of our beliefs around things we see on the internet. But, you know, and he used an example where he himself had become completely convinced that anybody associated with the NRA was a bad person because of all of the shootings. But what he decided to do, and here's an interesting thing, is he said, I was going to go learn how to shoot a gun and see who the people were, because he'd never picked up a gun in his life. And he was surprised as he took on this journey to go out to the gun range and learn about the people and their reasons as to why they were learning how to shoot guns, that they weren't that much different from him, right? They did have other fears, but they were human beings with reasons that they had for that. And I think this goes around your narratives that you weave in the personal anecdotes and reflections. You have these personals, and how your personal experiences, meaning those personal experiences I just brought up, actually shaped your understanding of love and faith. Because we all have personal experiences that we carry with us that certainly shape our understanding of what love and faith is. What did you find out?
Yeah, I want to say that, just so your audience knows for sure, that I'm a philosopher and I love arguments. And I think arguments are nearly totally useless. What has been most transformative to me was not an argument, it was another person. And they were surprising encounters that I had with people who were different from me. And the very first one that I write about in the book is I was a conservative Protestant fundamentalist, and all the way through college I was like that. And I thought all Catholics were going to hell. Mm-hmm. And I had arguments why all Catholics were going to hell. And I took a course in the Reformation, and I had all sorts of reasons and data and history. And then I went to Notre Dame, which is a mistake for people who think Catholics are going to hell. I don't recommend it, the premier Catholic university in the United States. And I started to meet a lot of Catholics, and I wasn't argued out of this. I just got to a point where I just couldn't believe they were all going to hell. I just thought, these are really good people who are doing the best that they can to try to understand reality. And I had similar experiences with Muslims. Getting to know Muslims Muslims who friended me, I'd like to say that I was the great friender here and I was the great lover here, but I thought, like, intellectually, Muslims, Christians, and Jews should try to get along a little better. But I wasn't really persuaded of, I guess, the full humanity and sincerity of Muslims till some of them friended me. And the friendships were transformative. And I love arguments, but nothing was more important to me than people who friended me.
It is something that happens, and I don't think we intentionally do it, but many of us are not exposed to huge amounts of diversity. So you say, well, what community do you live in? Do you have Hispanic? Do you have Black people? Do you have Muslims? Do you have Jews? Do you have whatever you do? But you're not really looking for it. You're not, you're kind of going on with your life, and you don't really realize how biased you become.
Yeah.
Right? And I have a question for you.
I just say one quick thing to that.
Yeah.
I have a friend who teaches at a seminary in town, and he had his seminary students who are mostly like in their 30s now. They don't go to seminary right away lots of times. Anyway, he asked them to keep track for 1 week, of every single person they met. And he had, I don't know, a dozen students, 16 students, and they came back, and all 16 had only met people who believed like them, had the same color skin. There's a phone book that's the Christian phone book. So if your car needed a repair, you go to a Christian car repairman. If you need bread, you go to the Christian bakery. Their kids go to Christian schools. They go to Christian youth leagues. So for 1 whole week, they never met anyone who was different from them. And I don't think that's unusual. And what that means is that if you think that compassion for people who are different from you is a good thing for the flourishing of the world, then you need the courage to step out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, it's really a dichotomy. I know I do work with the homeless, and frequently when I go out, I have to shift my perspective about, well, who are these people that I'm giving a gift card to, and how did they get here? And it's interesting how many times when you're paying more attention to who they are than versus you by asking questions that are open-ended around how did you get out on the street, how immediately they actually just they become alive, right? And you see them just as souls walking the planet who had a different course of direction that hit them, and usually financially or through drugs or whatever it might be. But the reality is you still have to show the compassion. And so, in the process of writing this book, what I think some of the listeners might want to know were, what are some of the theological challenges you faced, especially regarding views that might diverge within the same faith?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So I learned this. There is no such thing as Judaism or like a stereotypical Jew. There is no such thing as Christianity. There are multiple Christianities. We all know this. We all know there's Protestants and Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and Baptists and Baptists that think most Baptists are not right enough. And so then there's Second Baptists and Third Baptists, and the list could go on. And so there's so much theological diversity in every tradition. I had to figure out how to write about what I thought was common to the traditions. And I decided that I was just going to stick with their most sacred texts. So the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Quran. I use a few other texts, but it doesn't take long before people start to diverge. And then when people start to diverge, even within a tradition, they start to fear and sometimes even hate one another. Right. So I had to I had to figure out how within traditions to cultivate a kind of common language. And I also had to let the religion speak for themselves. So I think Islam has a really different view from the Christian tradition, and maybe a better view, honestly, than the Christian tradition on love of enemy. Because what I argue is that love, the highest form of love in each of these traditions, is the raging fire of love, that we feel something in our hearts. We don't just do things for people. You could go out to your homeless people and give them a bunch of cards. You could do something good, but you don't love them until you start to care for them.
Right.
And that takes a lot of work. And I could hear in your voice how you work to create that compassion for them. That's the highest form of love, but it's really hard to have that for enemies.
Well, I actually, I remind them of the things that they're doing because of my personal growth background. Like when I approach somebody and the guy around him has 6 beer cans and is staggering around, and I'm saying, this is not good for your life, nor are you going to get anywhere. And I'm actually preaching to agree. I'm the undercover evangelist, but I think it's important they hear, because they don't hear that all the time. They're not being influenced other than the people around them who are other homeless people, right? And so I think it's good for them to get a little bit of dose of medicine from me, who walks up and says, hey, I want to help you. And there's no strings attached here, but I am observing something about your behavior, which if you really want to make a difference in your life, you need to change, because you're not going to get anywhere the way you're going right now. And that's frequently my message. So what is one key message or insight that you hope readers will take away from the book Raging Fire, and that they literally could right now, just pull into their DNA and really become a better person as a result of reading your book?
So I hope that they're inspired to fuel the flames of fire for people who are different from them. So I hope everyone takes that away, that you understand traditions that are different from yours better. If you're an atheist and you had really negative views of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, I hope that you understand them and their traditions better. This is a book I wrote for everybody, but what can they do? What can they take away? I argue in the book that God may so love the world, but we finite creatures love usually just one person at a time. And so I say that people should go out of their houses and walk down the street, because in the United States, it's not uncommon to have a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, a black person, a Hispanic, somebody who's really different from you that you may fear. And I say, get out of your house and walk down and knock on the door and invite them for a cup of coffee.
That's the best thing you could have said. I find that people's outpouring of compassion frequently results as another person has a need, and they hope that they hope they can help that person with their need.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a story on CBS Sunday Morning, just this last one, and a little girl, 7 years old, down in Alabama, loses her money. Her mother was only 29 and living with her grandmother. And I say this story for this reason, because this talks about the outpouring of compassion. So she set up a lemonade stand because they had no money for a gravestone. This was, anybody who wants to go watch this, you'll be crying when you're done at the end. There was no money for a gravestone. They didn't have the money for her mother's gravestone. So she was raising money through selling lemonade to buy the gravestone for her mother. And they didn't say exactly how her mother died, and it doesn't make any difference. What makes a difference is the impact she made on so how many lives. She not only in this short period of time, she goes, well, I actually got $300 for one cup of lemonade. And she kind of giggles. And she then said, and so at the end of the story, the reporter says she raised $15,000 for her little lemonade stand. Oh, and by the way, all that money is going to go to support her education, because the company that makes the gravestones decided to donate the gravestone, so they didn't have to buy the gravestone for her mother's plot, right? And I was thinking to myself, what a great story of compassion when you saw all these people coming that they videotaped, giving $1, $10, $100, because they really loved the story, which was one of, how do I help this little girl who's really hurting inside? They were all hugging her. They were giving her love. They were giving her compassion. And that brings me to this. You have to have, over the time of writing this book, it has been out there a bit, had some critics or significant responses to your work that have prompted you to think differently about what I'm going to say, any of the topics in the book. Have you had people dialogue, interface with you, Kelly, that have shifted your perspective about maybe some of the things you wrote in the book?
Yeah, so I think I've sort of indicated some of the shifts that I've had since I've been working, for about 10 years on with projects that bring Muslims, Christians, and Jews together. And I've had all sorts of things that have changed because I had so many biases when I came into this. I'll just tell you one story. I went to an interfaith dinner at a local mosque, and each table at the dinner at the mosque had a member of the mosque that was there, and they were supposed to get us going in a conversation. So it was the Muslim, and then the rest of the table were Christians. And he asked, do you think Islam is more about love or about justice? And all the Christians went around. We all said it was about justice, including me. Like, I thought Islam is only about getting into the afterlife. If over 50% of your deeds are good, you get in. If they're not, you get out. You're out. So, and then he started to say, no, I think it's love. And then he tried to explain why, and all of us kept interrupting him and tried to tell him why he was wrong. And I think he was right. I didn't think it at the time. The thing that mainly moved me, or began to move me to think differently, was him. He was so patient and kind, and he was compassionate. He embodied compassion. That's the thing that made me think, all right, next time I'm going to do something different when I talk to somebody about their tradition. I'm going to listen. And
how novel is that?
I know. I feel like I'm a genius. Anyway, and I'm just not going to interrupt. And now when I do interfaith events, with 50 academics, I say you cannot tell anyone else what they believe. That you have to listen and let them tell you what you believe. And anyway, that started me thinking in a whole new way about. I began to think this: what if Islam really is about love and not about justice? And it got me to look at the Quran and Islamic tradition in a really different way. And it got me to look at Islam not as a militant or even a military religion, because there is a lot of bias in the West that Islam built its empire by the sword. And I had to overcome that bias to see what was the Prophet really trying to teach people a long time ago, to get out their sword and spread Islam by threat of death. And I came to learn, no, he was trying to get people to be compassionate towards people who were different from them.
Well, it's interesting you say this, because you're talking about Christian faith, Muslim faith.
Yeah.
And as you're talking, I'm reflecting on certain little stories, but one is, you obviously, you had Gandhi, you had Mother Teresa, you've got the Dalai Lama, you've got all of these leaders in faith, Desmond Tutu, and it goes on and on and on. But I remember a statement made about Mother Teresa. Somebody went to her and said, hey, will you march against this, whatever it was? And she says, if I can't march for something, I will never march against anything, right? And I look at that and it's like, if we had more people that thought that way, right? And just said, I'm not against, because it's this againstness that puts the wall up between us.
Yeah.
That we're like, I'm against it. No, I can choose to be for it, but I don't have to be vocal enough to go out or outrageous enough to say, well, I'm against that. And that brings me to your findings and experiences. I'm glad you had that transformation at that interfaith event, because that was an epiphany for you. What practical advice would you give the individuals as we sum up our interview, looking to foster interfaith understanding and harmony in their own communities? Because this is like the quintessential question, right? It's like, okay, we've talked a lot about this, but am I going to go down now to a Muslim mosque and say, hey, I'm here and I love you guys and do whatever? Probably not, right?
No.
But we're going to stay in places. And here's the thing. You've said this. We're creatures of safety. And so we stay in zones of safety.
Yeah.
We don't go out of a comfort zone. How would you help us ease out of our safety zone into an uncomfortable zone to allow us to experience something new in that discomfort that we get joy and pleasure from as a result of doing such thing?
Yeah. So you've put exactly why this is so hard to do. I mean, it's not that natural for us, because what's natural is for us to hang around people that look and act just like us.
Right.
That's totally natural, easy to do. I will say in most communities in any fairly large city, there are interfaith groups that are trying to bring people together. And Grand Rapids is a medium-sized city in the United States, and there's an Abrahamic dinner once a year. There's the mosques do interfaith events where they invite people. I went one time to a Sikh, S-I-K-A.
Yeah.
The way they really pronounce it.
Sikh. I was in Australia and we were waited on by some Sikhs, and it's interesting. Their philosophy, they're so compassionate.
I know. That's like the thing.
They're amazing people. I don't know many of them, but I did run in the course of my life, my 69 years so far, a handful. And I'm going to say this, I'm probably spouting off here, and I don't really care what other people think so much about what I'm going to say. I've never found a more compassionate, loving, understanding group of people with so much tolerance and love. And I'm like, well, do you know much about the Sikh religion? And I go, no, I don't. I really should learn a lot more about these people.
Yeah, so I came to the same conclusion, and probably for the same reason. I knew almost nothing about Sikhism, and these people served us food. They were engineers and doctors, and they were unbelievably highly educated people. And they're serving food. And somebody gave a talk that night. They had some special speaker, and I thought he was really boring, but I was really moved by being served dinner by the Sikhs. And then I found out that there are places in India where they serve like 500,000 meals a day in different Sikh communities. So anyone is welcome. The door is open. They don't ask any questions. Anyone can come in and get food, and they do it. So anyway, these events are
all over.
They're all over. They're worth going to. But my big advice would be just look around your neighborhood. Have everyone over for a coffee in your backyard or something like that, and just start to learn about people who are different from you.
Well, I think your advice is really, we have to embrace the discomfort before we can grow.
Yeah.
And that means you getting in your car, whether it's electric or gas, and driving down somewhere to an interfaith group and introducing yourself and shutting up and listening to the stories, right? And I could not be more pleased than the outcome of this interview, because if that's all that we encouraged as a result, which was to get a lot of listeners to like, hey, these two guys made sense over the last 45 minutes. I think maybe what I'll do is go check out an interfaith thing, or I'll go make a couple of calls, or I'll examine how I could do this a bit more comfortably for myself. Whatever it might be, I think we need to break the mold of the kind of people we always hang around with.
Yeah.
Because they're always the same. If you really look at it through your life, you're pretty much hanging around a lot of the same people most of the time, and you're not going to grow both spiritually, emotionally, mentally, intellectually until you get to experience it. And you're perfect. I'm going to tell all my listeners, please go to Kelly James Clark's website, and I'm going to give the website again out here for everyone. It's pretty simple. It's just Kelly James Clark, 3 first names, and it's Wix, W-I-X, site.com. There you can learn about his blogs, his projects, the books, his publications, everything's there, and he's a prolific writer. It's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth and having this dialogue about raging fire, and most importantly, what we can do to change our behavior to make this world a better place.
Thank you, Greg, and I hope everybody flames a little fire in their hearts for people who are different from them.
Well, and I always usually at the end of these say namaste. Now, I know in the end, because I follow Self-Realization Fellowship, all those people get that, but this is only, I see the God in you that sees the God in me. Thank you for that, Kelly.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.